are you joining from? So I can see from Vancouver. Hi everyone. Hello everyone. Welcome to this webinar with Gabor Maté. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you everyone for joining. Hi everyone. Hi Gabor. How
Hi,
are
Leo.
you?
Hi, Leo. I'm very well, thank you. Nice to be here.
Right? Excited to be here as well. People, tell us where you're joining from. So I can see from Vancouver. I can see Sonia from Portugal. I can see Colin from Canada. Jolene from Toronto. All right, from a little bit everywhere in the world. Well, thank you everyone for joining. It's a real pleasure to be here. So many people are gathered tonight, so I feel like it's going to be an exciting moment. And maybe we can start this webinar by presenting ourselves. So maybe Gabor, can you introduce yourself for people who don't know you?
Sure. Well, I imagine most people do, but for those who don't, I'm a retired medical doctor. Worked for 30 years, 32 years as a physician in family practice and working with dying people in palliative care and also with severe addictions. I've written books on child development, on trauma, on health, the mind-body unity, on the relationship of the individual to the environment and how that affects the body and the mind. I've written books on addictions, on parenting. So I have many interests, and these days I teach a lot online or in person. I just came back from a 3-week tour of Australia, for example.
All right. Well, thank you, Gabor. As for me, I'm Leo. I'm the co-founder of Mentor. So Mentor is an online platform building masterclasses with the greatest specialists in the world. And what we want to do is to give you practical tools to heal from trauma, but also to build your self-confidence, to manage your relationships, for example, and I would say more broadly to live a more fulfilled life. So we come from France, as you can notice from my wonderful accent, but now we are all over the world. And so this webinar today is a special event for the launch of Gabor Mate's new masterclass, new online course, which we called Heal, that we'll present to you at the end of this webinar. So actually, we'll spend about 1 hour and a half together, and we'll go through first the topic of this webinar, which is why trauma holds you back and how to reconnect with your true self. And so Gabor will explore these themes through 3 parts. First off, how the conflict between attachment and authenticity in childhood can shape your whole life. Then second, we'll go into the impact of trauma on your body, on your mind, and on your relationships. And last, Gabor will guide you through a special exercise to start reconnecting with your authentic self. After this, Gabor and I will present Gabor's new masterclass, Heal. And at the end of this webinar, we'll keep 30 minutes approximately for a Q&A session with where Gabor will answer the questions you might have. So actually, everyone, please send over your questions in the chat. You can give your questions throughout the whole webinar, and the Mentor Show team will gather them and will ask Gabor as many as possible. So without further ado, we can get started already. And well, Gabor, you know, when we started building the masterclass, we talked to many people who have suffered from trauma, and they often feel like they have no control over their lives. So my question to you is, how does trauma disconnect us from who we really are?
Well, that's actually a key question. And it's also the central issue in trauma, I've come to believe, is that we end up not knowing who we are and not knowing why we act the way we act. And in many ways, we're like puppets pulled on a string by our unconscious, the imprints and the programmings that we downloaded very early in life as a result of trauma, or at least of what I call trauma. And a key aspect of that process is that we lose the connection to ourselves. And let me tell you a few things. I have a favorite teacher who says the following. He says, most of our dissatisfaction comes from not being ourselves, not knowing who we are, not knowing or being true to our nature, not being free. Now he's talking about in a spiritual sense because he's a spiritual teacher, but I say it's also true in a psychological sense. In fact, the two can't even be separated. And there's a great Canadian stress researcher who, like myself, actually came from Hungary to Canada. He was a part Hungarian. His name was János Selye, Salye, and he's the one that worked with animals in the laboratory, showing that when you stress animals, what happens to their immune system and their guts and their adrenal glands. I'll talk something about the impacts of trauma on the body a little bit later in this presentation. But Selye, besides being a medical doctor, was also a bit of a Renaissance man and certainly a humanist. And he said in his great book, The Stress of Life, that most of the stresses in modern society are emotional ones. And the biggest stress of all is trying to be somebody that you're not. And that's a very common theme. And now, why would somebody try to be somebody that they're not? Nobody's born being somebody that they're not. And nobody's born separated from themselves. So ask yourself this question. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands this time, but often when I present to audiences, I ask them, raise your hand if you've ever had the experience, of having a strong gut feeling about something and not paying attention to it, ignoring it, and then regretting it afterwards. So ignoring a strong gut feeling and then being sorry afterwards. And, you know, in Sydney, Australia, 2 weeks ago or so, I spoke to 8,000 people. And when I asked people to put their hands up, out of the 8,000, probably at least 7,000, if not more, put their hands up. So it's a very common occurrence. And of course, I too had to put my hand up because it's happened to me. Now, that's not trivial. That's not trivial. Why are gut feelings important? And gut feelings are an important way of knowing. We have this idea that we know through the mind. By the mind, we think of the brain up here, behind our forehead. And that's an important way of knowing, but it's not the only way of knowing. And the gut is an important source of information. In fact, the gut sends many more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the gut. And the gut has a nervous system that's full of a lot of the same chemicals that the brain has. So, why is that important? It's important because of human evolution. How did we evolve? Where did we come from? Well, obviously, like other animals, and sometimes we forget that we are animals. We get kind of arrogant and we talk about animals as these other creatures. Well, we're animals too. We're a very special sort of animal. As one friend of mine, a psychologist, says that human beings are animals with special needs. Well, that's true, but we're animals, and we evolved out in nature. And like all other animals, evolution gave us gut feelings because they warn us about reality. They tell us what's real and what isn't. And how long does and don't forget, human beings, our own species, has been on the earth for 150, 200,000 years. And until a few thousand years ago, 15,000 years ago, so all of us lived out in nature. And in many places of the world, until much more recently, I was just in Australia. You know, Australia's got the oldest culture in the world. The Aboriginal people have been there for 60,000 years. And until 200 years ago, they lived out in nature purely. Now, how long does any creature out there in nature survive if they're not connected to their gut feelings? So that's essential. And more broadly, it's important to be connected to our emotions, because our emotions, at the very least, give us information about the world, or they give us information about our internal states. And we were emotional creatures long before we were intellectual creatures. So the intellect is based on this scaffolding of emotions. So losing connection with all that is a real deficit. So why would we do that? Why would we lose it? Why would we disconnect? Why would we then not pay attention to our gut feelings? There must be a powerful reason, and there is. And one of the most essential understandings that I've come to, and I'm not the only one, but I've certainly have embraced it, is that fundamentally there's nothing wrong with any of us. So everything you think is wrong with you, your dysfunctions and your disturbing emotions and your reactions and your shame and all that kind of stuff, we can talk about that later. It's not who you are. These are responses to events. And so this disconnection from ourselves, this disengagement from our gut feelings and truly knowing our emotions, they must have had a powerful reason. If there's nothing wrong with any of us, then there must be a strong reason why would we give up access to ourselves. And there is. Now that access to ourselves, that being in touch with ourselves, that connection, that's what I call authenticity. And authenticity comes from the word auto, the self, like an automobile is a self-propelling mobile. Auto, the self, autonomous. So authenticity is that connection. Why would we give it up? Well, that's because there's another need that we have as children, especially. It's a need that stays with us all our lives, as we all know, but it's never as strong and as imperative and as essential, as indispensable as it is in childhood, and especially in early childhood, but throughout. And that is attachment. And attachment, in this case, means connection, is to drive to connect with other people for the purpose of being taken care of, or for the purpose of taking care of the other. That's the essence of the attachment drive. It's wired into our brains. We're creatures of attachment. And if you don't understand what I mean, just think of what that you felt the last time you and your partner had a falling out and you believed that you weren't loved anymore. Mm-hmm. You only believed it for a day, like I did yesterday. I'll come to that later.
Right.
The point is that we know how important attachment is, and now for the infant and the young child, I mean, for the adult, let's say nobody loved you, you could still survive. You'd be unhappy, still survive, depending on how much you believed in yourself. But the child can't. So for the child, the attachment need is absolutely non-negotiable. So the human infant is the least mature, the least developed, and the most dependent, and stays that way for the longest period of time of any mammal. Think about it. A horse can run on the first day of life. Like if the horse is born, half an hour later, the little colt can run. Now, still needs the mother, but can mobilize. Human child can't do that for a year and a half, 2 years. The horse's brain development is way ahead of us at the time of birth. So there's reasons for that. I'm not going to go into here. But the point is, we're born dependent. We're born needing, depending on attachment. So we have this need for attachment, and we have this need for authenticity. Both clear survival needs. And ideally, we can have both. So ideally, in your friendships, in your important personal relationships, you can be yourself and still have the relationship, so that you don't have to be somebody else in order to be accepted on the job or with your friends, with the people that you're close to. Ideally, and especially ideally, children can be themselves, have their gut feelings, have their emotions, and that should not threaten, undermine, or weaken the attachment relationships. But here's what happens. What if there's a conflict? What if there's a conflict between your need to attach and your need to be authentic? Well, then, what do you choose? Now, very frankly, one purpose of this masterclass we've developed here is to help you make a choice as an adult. To help you make a choice as an adult that as a kid you had no choice at all. Because the child cannot say to themselves, okay, I'm going to be myself. If they like me, they like me. If they don't like me, they don't like me. It's their problem.
Mm-hmm.
Kid can't do that because his, her, their survival depends on being accepted. And therefore, if this conflict arises, it's not a question of a choice. And if you ask yourself, even as adults, what's it like for you when there's a conflict between your truth, what you feel, what you know to be valid for yourself, and you need to be accepted by others? How free do you perceive yourself? How much freedom do you experience to be yourself? A lot of people have great difficulty, and they'll often give up their authentic being, their authentic feelings, their sense of authenticity for the sake of being liked and being accepted. Even as adults, even though we don't depend on it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And for the child, it's not a choice. And one of the intentions of my teachings in this masterclass as well, and also just of this webinar, is to help support people to make that choice, to have that freedom, that if we have to choose between authenticity versus attachment, at least we're conscious of it and we're making a conscious choice, not just an automatic falling into a pattern. Now, what happens to kids is that they automatically fall into the pattern of giving up their authenticity. Why did they do that? Well, we can imagine two scenarios, one of them very disturbing, but still very common. The other much more common, not as disturbing, but still not helpful or healthy. The really disturbing situation is when children are actively hurt and abused. Again, I mentioned that I was in Australia just recently. A study there a few years ago showed that tens of thousands of children there have in recent decades been abused in institutions like schools and the church. Tens of thousands. And that's happened a lot, especially to indigenous people, but not only, of course, here in North America, and so on. Now, when a child is being abused, whether it's emotional, sexual, physical, whether the circumstances are chaotic or threatening, whether there's violence in the family, whatever's going on, what can the child do? The gut feeling of the child says to run away. That's what a gut feeling is. if there's no help. I mean, actually, our original reaction is just to ask for help. That's what babies do.
Mm-hmm.
When a baby's in trouble, uh, first thing they do is they ask for help. That's why they cry. When the child's crying, most of the time, they're asking for help. They're uncomfortable, they're asking for help. And babies do that automatically. They don't suppress themselves that way. So, but that's assuming help is available. Now, the child is being abused. There's no help available. The gut thing says, run away. No, can't. When you're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you can't run away. Or the gut feeling says, fight back, fight or flight. But you can't do that either. So you can't ask for help, you can't fly, you can't escape, and you can't resist. So what do? You disconnect from yourself, you freeze. Now, when do people freeze? When do you get freezing? You get freezing when you go to a dentist. And it's going to hurt. So they give you freezing so you don't feel the pain. And that disconnection is a survival mechanism on the part of the child. It's not a mistake. It's not a weakness. It's not lack of courage. It's a survival mechanism. So that disconnection is a survival mechanism. And then you lose your authenticity. You give it up. You don't give it up consciously. If you give it up consciously, that might be a good thing, because then you could consciously take it back again. If you could say to yourself, okay, I'm being hurt, temporarily I'm going to disconnect so I don't feel the pain, but when I can, I'll reconnect, you'd be okay. But this is not conscious, it's much deeper than that. It's in the unconscious, and therefore it's not accessible to you. And then it's programmed into you, and then you follow that pattern for the rest of your life. So even now, and everybody here, I assume, who's on this webinar, is an adult, what's it like for you to ask for help, for example? Even with your intimate partner, how courageous, or I should say, how ready are you to really share what's happening for you? And how much pretending do we do? Of not upsetting the apple cart, as they say. So again, this choice between authenticity and attachment is not a choice at all. It's simply an outcome of trauma. And then the task becomes, how do we regain that connection? And at the end of this part of this webinar, we'll be doing a 10-minute exercise with you as one way of reconnecting. It's rather simple. You'll be surprised how simple it is, but it's also very powerful.
Yeah, simple but powerful. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No. So, Gabor,
yeah.
Let's say we don't take care of that disconnection, and well, we don't recreate this connection with my authenticity. What can be the long-term effects of trauma on our lives?
Yes. So here's a really important thing to understand, is that people think of trauma as something terrible having happened to them. Oh, by the way, I just thought that I forgot to complete. So so children can give up their authenticity under conditions of severe stress, like I mentioned earlier, or abuse. But it can also happen under much more benign or ordinary, normal-looking circumstances, just in families where the parents are not attuned to the child. They don't know how to listen to the child's emotions. In families where parents themselves are troubled or stressed, or the parents themselves learned, they grew up in a home where there's a lot of anger, so they're afraid of anger. So when their kids get angry, they listen to all these parenting teachers or parenting experts, so-called, who tell them an angry child should be made to sit by themselves and punished. Tantrum should be punished, The child still gets a message that I can be authentic, I can have my authentic feeling, or I can be accepted, but I can't have both. So what I'm saying is, you don't need severe traumatic events. It's too common in modern society. And what's interesting is, it doesn't happen in indigenous societies. Indigenous societies really know how to listen to their kids and to respond to them in an attuned kind of way. So it's something that we've lost. Well, to come back to your question then, Leo, about the impacts of trauma. So first thing to understand, as I began to say, is that trauma is not the terrible things or the less terrible things that happen to you. Trauma is what happened inside you as a result of what happened to you. That's an important distinction for two reasons. First of all, trauma literally means a wound. So trauma is, and as a teacher in this mentor show, mentor masterclass, trauma is a wound that you sustain. Literally, trauma means wound. That's what the word actually means. Now, it's the nature of a wound that unless it heals, it keeps hurting us. So trauma is not what happened to you 20, 30, 40, or in my case, 80 years ago. Trauma, the wound that we're still carrying. That's a good thing. Because if trauma is what happened to us all those years ago, guess what? It's over. It's finished. Nothing you can do about it. But if trauma is the wound that I'm carrying now, and one of the teachings here is going to be just how to recognize the wounds that you're carrying. We'll talk more about that later. But that can be healed in the present moment. So that's the whole point, is the healing of trauma in the present, because the wound is showing up in the present. So trauma is a wound that hasn't healed. And that can have multiple impacts. It can show up in our bodies in the form of chronic pain, for example. A lot of research has linked chronic pain in adulthood to childhood trauma, because trauma changes how the brain relates to pain. So a lot of the time, people get medical procedures done for chronic pain, and sometimes that can be very useful, and sometimes it's necessary. But much of the time, it's unresolved emotional issues. They're actually in the body and they're carrying the pain, and that's what the person is feeling. And then the doctors then tell them it's all in your head. You know, it's not in there. It's in their bodies, including in their brains. So chronic pain, in the masterclass, as in my books, I talk about how trauma can potentiate illness in the body, how trauma can lead to afflictions of the mind and the emotions, how it can interfere with our emotional lives, our sense of ourselves, how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we see our partners. So trauma can have all these impacts. Trauma can show up every time you're triggered by something, every time you react in a way that seems odd. You know, when you look at it afterwards, at the moment of reactivity and triggering, we think we're just, you know, reacting to what's going on. And then later on, you might ask yourself, my God, what was that all about? Well, anytime you ask yourself afterwards, what was that all about? It's because you weren't in the present. You were reacting from the past. And one of the things that trauma does is it obliterates the distinction between the past and the present. So very often, it's impossible for us to be in the present moment because we're too much under the impact of the past. And there's Richard Ford, an American novelist, says in one of his books that all we ever want is to be free of the past, so that the past doesn't have control. It doesn't control us anymore. And I was reading an Australian novel recently, still reading it, and this author says that the past is like a cancer that metastasizes into the present, and that's what happens with trauma. Now, this is all good news again, because if If it was all in the past, as I said earlier, there's not much we can do about it. But the reality is, there are ways we can recognize our trauma, how it's showing up in our lives. There are ways in which we can be aware of how it's pulling us on a string so we're not free. You remember Pinocchio, the puppet, who said, how foolish I was when I was a puppet. And we all are. We're foolish when we're puppets, when we're puppets to our subconscious, to our unconscious. It's like there's some little guy behind the scenes pulling all the strings, and we think that's reality. It does not have to be reality. I can tell people that sometimes it feels hopeless. Sometimes it does. Some people have really been badly hurt, and it may occur to them that there's nothing they can do, that it's hopeless. I'm telling you, even the belief that it's hopeless is an impact of trauma. It's a memory. Because when a child is being hurt, to that child at that moment, it seems hopeless. Because the child can't imagine being strong enough to deal with this. There's no help available. And also for children, you see, time is eternal. You can't tell a kid, a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old, that food is coming in 5 minutes. For the child, the present is eternity. There's either food now or there's no food now. When you say no food now,
Exactly.
you're saying that there's no food for an eternity. And, you know, in one of my books, I give an example of my mother and I. And I had a very difficult first year of life, as many of you would know if you listened to me talk before, due to the war, due to anti-Semitism, due to the genocide that I was born into. But here I'm talking about something very simple. My mother is keeping a diary, and she writes in her diary that, I'm just paraphrasing her, talking to me, because the diary was written to me.
Okay.
And I'm 3 weeks of age at the time, and she says, "No, you're really giving me what for? You've been crying for the last hour and a half because you wanted to eat, and I promised the doctor that I only feed you every 4 hours. And there's still another hour, there's still a half an hour left. And so my heart is breaking," says my mother. "But my poor little kid, you're going to have to recognize that nighttime is for sleeping, not for eating." Well, here's the deal. You tell a mother cat not to feed the baby when the baby's hungry. You tell a mother orangutan not to suckle the baby when the baby wants to breast. You tell any mother connected to their own gut feelings. And my mother's heart was breaking. But she was not following her own gut feelings. She was following doctor's orders. What's it like for a child? You know, forget the Second World War, forget the Nazis. What's it like for a child for an hour and a half to be lying next to the person to whom, the person who represents the whole world to him, and this person is not responsive to his needs? Well, what's the message that I get? My feelings don't matter. I don't matter. So what I'm saying is, it doesn't take something extraordinary to make us disconnect from ourselves and to wound us. It's very common. And again, what I want to finish with here is that all the things that you think is wrong with you are actually understandable responses to traumatic events, where you weren't listened to, where your needs were suppressed, or when you were actively hurt. And that wound that you carry can be healed in the present moment, which doesn't mean that you'll never be upset again in your whole life. I promise you.
Of course.
But it does mean is that you'll have tools and understandings and insights with which to confront and deal with those situations.
So again, as you said, it's very common, and I would say that the most common thing that we've encountered speaking to a lot of people who has suffered from trauma, is the inability to say no. And maybe that's where this connection with my authenticity is the more blatant.
And that's where it begins, actually.
And that's probably where it begins. And so you've created this exercise that we're going to go into. We're going to go into this third part with a special exercise to deal with that moment that is very common, not only in the amount of people but also in each and everyone's lives, to be able to deal with this moment and this inability to say no. So yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So I noticed that one of the, by the way, not just I noticed, but it's been written up in studies as well, is that one of the features of people that get chronically ill is they're difficult to assert themselves and to say no. Now, here's the thing about no. If you're a parent, if you have been a parent, you'll know this. At age 1.5 or so, between 1.5 and 2, your sweet little, cute, cuddly little baby is going to start saying no. And it's interesting how common that word is. Like in Hungarian, it's nem. In Russian, it's niet. In French, it's non. In German, it's nein. You know, it's interesting how internationally. Anyway, at least the European languages. In any case, the kid starts saying no. Now, why does the kid start saying no rather than yes? Time to put your shoes on. Yes. Time for dinner. Oh, yes. Kid says no, because nature programs that into the child. Before we learn how to say yes, and before our yeses mean anything at all, we have to be able to say no. If I call Leo, if I flew to Paris and I call Leo,
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. But if I call you up and hey, can you meet me for coffee? And you've been up all night with a sick relative, or you've been stressed out, tired, and you don't feel like saying yes, but you don't know how to say no, then your yes doesn't mean a thing. Your yes doesn't mean that you like me. Your yes doesn't mean that you want to be with me. Your yes doesn't mean that you want to do this. The gist is that you don't know how to say no. So we have to learn how to say no before you know how to say yes. And that's why nature programs the no before it programs the yes. Now, in a lot of families, that's not acceptable. And the kid, for all kinds of reasons I'm not going to go into, but then the kid gives up the capacity to say no freely. So this exercise is designed to help you recognize and deal with your difficulty saying no. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions. And I think, Leo, you're asking people to write their answers into the...
Yes, it would be great if for each of these questions you can answer in the chat, and maybe we can read some of those through.
Okay. So the first question is, in what areas of your life do you have difficulty saying no? And you can think of maybe this week. This is an exercise people can do once a week, by the way. And then they've told me that just doing this exercise once a week has made a huge difference for them. Just a simple exercise. The first question is, where did I have trouble saying no? Now you can answer this question specifically, like where this last week did I have trouble saying no, or in general, where in life do I have difficulty saying no. This tends to be in two areas. It tends to happen in personal relationships, with spouses, for adult kids, with parents, with friends, or on the job.
Oh, we have Jen, we have professional, Angela, work, a lot of work, also to family members, for Darren, work, relationship, work and marriage,
yes.
Romantic, work, everything.
Yes.
We have a lot of romantic relationship for Nurul, children for Verna. So yeah, relationships and work.
Okay.
and a lot of everywhere for a lot of people.
Okay, so here's the deal. You sit down once a week and you write down where this week, or do you even just take one example and write down where this week did I not say no? When there's a no that wanted to be said. There's a no that you wanted to say but you didn't. Just write it down. And when you do this exercise, be conscious. Like just be aware. Okay, this week I didn't say no with such and such a person. Okay? Now, don't judge yourself. Don't put yourself down. Don't criticize yourself. Don't say, I should have said yes. Just be like a neutral observer of yourself. So, where did you have trouble saying no this week? So, that's the first question. The second question then is, what is the story? No, I should say no. That's not the first question. The second question is, what is the impact of my difficulty saying no? When there's a no there that I want to say, but I don't say it, what is the impact on you? So that's the second question. What is the impact on you where you don't give your authentic no? So maybe some of you could write down the answer. Those impacts can be physical or emotional. But what is the impact?
So, for example, we have Bobby who says, I feel bad or guilty. Guilt, I feel bad about myself. Resentment for Jacqueline. Lauren says, overwhelmed. Marta says, I feel I am weak. Basson, I felt very stressed. Resentment, pain, overwhelm, anger, anxiety, guilt, among others.
Got it. So notice that there are basically three types of impacts, and these have all been mentioned in these responses that Leo has read out. One is negative thoughts directed towards yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody says, I feel weak. Now, I got news for you, everybody. There's no such thing as feeling weak. That's not a feeling. And I believe I do talk about this in the masterclass.
Right.
Feelings are, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm sad, I'm angry. I am weak is it's not a feeling. It's a self-judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the impact is negative emotions and judgments directed towards yourself. That's a serious impact. Number one. Number two, resentment towards the other. So notice how self-defeating this situation is. You don't say no because you want to maintain a relationship, and then you feel resentful to the other person, which undermines the relationship. So you get the very opposite of what you want. Because I got news for you. That other person can feel the resentment. So that's the second impact. The third impact is emotional and physical. You feel overwhelmed. So you might feel fatigued. You might have trouble sleeping. You might sleep too much. You might have all kinds of bodily sensations. So the impacts are not trivial. That little word that in English has only 2 letters in it, you don't say it, it's got all these impacts on yourself, on your relationship, and on your body and your mind. Now, that's the second question. The third question has to do with the fact that there's always a story behind your inability to say no. When I say a story, I mean there's a belief. You believe something about yourself. If I say no, such and such will happen. Or if I say no, that makes me into such and such. That's by the story I mean the belief. So what is the hidden belief? Think about it. Again, don't judge yourself. Just conduct a compassionate inquiry, which I'll mention again later. A compassionate inquiry. What do I believe here? If I say no, like for example, maybe Leo, I can start you off. This is one. If I fly to Paris and I call you up and yeah, you want to have cafe and you say oui when you want to say no, what do you think you might believe about yourself? Why you're not saying no? If you say no, then what does that make you?
Well, I would think that I would disappoint you, or I wouldn't, I wouldn't be at your expectation, or I would let you down in some way.
Okay, so you wouldn't be a good friend, right?
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't be a good friend, which I would like. I would like to be.
Yeah. So that's the
And
belief. So that's the belief. Okay.
yeah, and we have people saying similar things here, like for example, Verna,
Yeah.
that they won't like me. Kelly, who says failure. Fatima, who says I'll be unloved. Which are that I'm selfish and not liked for Jacqueline.
Yeah. So there's all these beliefs. Now, again, if you have those beliefs, you weren't born with them. So you learned them somewhere. But it's important to distinguish them. Okay, if I say no, I'm selfish. Now, if you turn that around, usually you will not judge somebody else like that. Like if you call me up for coffee and I say, listen, I'm so sorry, but I was up all night and I just don't have the energy. Would you call me selfish? Not a bad friend. You probably would not.
No, I wouldn't.
So we tend to be harsher on ourselves than we are on other people. Not all of us and not all the time, but much of the time, most people are harsher on themselves than they are towards other people. So that's the third question, is what is the belief? And then, of course, you can ask yourself, where did I learn these stories? Well, this is where you look at your childhood. Where did you learn this? Of course you learned it. You weren't born with it. Even as a one-day-old baby, you knew how to say no. If somebody tried to stuff some food in your mouth that you didn't want, you know how to say no. And then, of course, at 1.5, you started saying it. It's interesting. Leo, I have a question for you. In English, we have this expression called the terrible twos, when kids start being resistant and oppositional. Is there any such expression in France?
Not that I know of, but we do have the same moments with children where everything is just no all the time.
Yeah. I know that happens, but maybe I think the Europeans or the non-English are not as uptight about this as a lot of the people who grew up in English countries. But it's the same dynamic everywhere. So that's so where did you learn this? And so actually think about it. Just spend some time, write it down. Where did I learn this? And the reason it's important to distinguish what the belief is and where you learned it is, because then you can deal with it. Is it really true? Is it really true that somebody who says no is selfish? Is that really true? Well, maybe, but maybe not. So and then the next and the final question is, but it's not the final question. It's the final question for this exercise is, where are you not saying yes that you want to say yes? Because so many people have such a hard time saying no to the demands, expectations, and judgments of the world that they don't find the space and the time to say yes to what they really want. So you need to ask yourself, what are you not saying yes to? What creative urge, expressive urge, what desire for activity or interest are you not saying yes to because you haven't left yourself space and time and freedom because you don't know how to say no? So that's the last question. In what areas or where are you not saying yes? I wonder if there's any answers to that.
Yeah, we have a Bobby who says to myself, to self-care, to rest. Bunny who says to my healing journey. Angela who says to doing things for my happiness. Darren for my interests, my hobbies. Cynthia who says to love.
Good. Okay, but those are not trivial, unimportant things, are they? They're huge.
Right.
They're huge.
Mhm.
And so this is one exercise. If that's all you get from today's webinar, if you just do this exercise once a week, but not just quickly through your head, but actually sitting down and writing it out once a week, takes you 10 minutes, 15 minutes, it can change much about how you live your life.
Right. Thank you so much for this exercise, Gabor. I think I saw Jamie saying so many eye-opening info here. Thank you so much. So actually, people, can you tell us in the chat, was this exercise useful? Did you get something from it? Please let us know in the chat. We'd like to have your feedback. Amy, who says thank you. Alina, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for sharing with us in the chat. It's also useful to see all the testimonies that we have in the chat for every single person. Yana, who says yes. Andrea, very useful, very eye-opening for Sarah. So thank you everyone. Well, if you got something from this exercise, I think you will really love the masterclass. And actually, maybe now is a good time for us, Gabor, to take some time, take a few minutes to present your new masterclass, Heal, that we will launch for the first time today. So I'll share here presentation. So Gabor, it's the outcome of quite a long road because, well, we met for the first time about 1 year and a half ago or 2 years ago. And now my question to you is, there's a lot of material from you out there. There are your books, there's a lot of videos. So why did you want to do a masterclass, and what's different about it?
Well, the first truth is it wasn't my idea. I don't come up with these ideas. I just sort of put one foot ahead of the other. But but why did I respond to the idea when I received it from you? It's because, which I did, and I'm thankful for it. I saw an opportunity. It's true. There's a lot of my work out there. There's dozens of my lectures and interviews, podcasts on YouTube, and that's accessible to anybody, anytime. They don't have to sign up for anything. And of course, there's my books, which have sold millions of copies in over 40 languages. So there's a lot of my material out there. But there isn't any one program that summarizes in a practical way about how people can utilize those principles in their lives. So I think there's a lot of valuable content in there with lots of insights and teachings, and I know they've helped a lot of people. I get that feedback. But I wanted to, at least I responded to the opportunity to create something practical, a step-by-step program that people could actually follow with concrete steps and routines that they could integrate into their lives. And so this mentorship, this masterclass gave me the opportunity to develop such a program. And it was, I don't know how to say this, I rarely develop anything on my own. I just sort of present my ideas. So I needed help to develop it, and you and your team gave me that help. The other thing is that when you see me being interviewed, even live or on a podcast, I think it's good stuff, but you don't see me interacting with live participants, with people who are people coming to me with their actual problem. So that for this masterclass, we invited a group of people, volunteers, who are willing to share their own stories, their own challenges, their own problems, and have them interact with me in an attempt to gain some insight and some transformation around these problems. So it's live and it's interactive, and you'll see me in action with these people. As to some extent, you'll see me, well, not quite so much in the Q&A, but in this masterclass, it's actually me actually interacting with live human beings with their vital issues. And then again, as I said earlier, it's a way to present practices, meditations, journaling, ways of thinking um, over time, so that it's something that you can absorb and integrate into your life over time. And it does take time, and
Mhm.
you're not going to get it just because by watching it the first time. But they're practical tools. There's a workbook along with it that we ask you to, or suggest that you practically work with. So it's to summarize, it's the opportunity to present my teachings in a practicable way that caused me to accept your invitation to do this.
Right. And one of the reasons we have built it this way is because of the methodology behind it. So when we start building a masterclass, the first thing we do is we talk to a lot of people who have suffered from trauma. In this case, we got responses for almost 3,000 people. And we really ask them, what they need, what they want, what would be the perfect solution for them. And in this case, really overwhelmingly, people answered that they needed practical exercises. Um, they also needed live consultations and these meditations and scientific papers that we mentioned, but mostly people wanted a practical guide. And why do people want a practical guide? Is because, well, it feels that knowledge can only get you so far, information can get you so far. Um, what you really need to heal is practice, is creating new habits, and new ways to apply those teaching in your life. So it feels like healing is a little bit like physical exercise, right? So I know, Gabor, you're a swimmer, and you're not gonna get good at swimming by watching videos on how to swim. Maybe it will teach you some things, but at some point, if you want to get good at swimming, you need to swim, and then your body will change, your brain will change, and it feels like it's the same for healing. And that's why we created this masterclass as a practical guide with dozens of routines, of exercises, of written exercises, but also somatic exercises and meditations. There's also an exclusive emergency kit in there for when things go out of control, or where I'm being triggered, or I'm repeating a pattern, and to be able to get out of that pattern. And actually, on this, people, if you stay until the end of the webinar, we'll play one of the lessons of the masterclass, which includes one of the 10, 12 tools included in this emergency kit. So you will get a little bit of an idea of what's in the masterclass. So many things in there, but the general idea was, and that's why we call this masterclass Heal. It's because it's a 4-step program, like the 4 letters of Heal.
Yeah.
Actually, let's get Gabor into the 4 stages, and why they are important in the process of healing. And actually,
Yeah.
the first step here is H, like hear the pain.
So, so
And
here's the
go
deal.
ahead.
Here's the deal. A lot of the time, so HEAL is a nice acronym in English, HEAL, but it also speaks to the truth of what needs to happen. So the first,
Mhm.
to hear the pain. Now, I mentioned that you should have seen me yesterday, and I was actually in a state. Something happened. I'm not going to go into any details. The day before, that had me triggered, and when I get triggered, this is even after all this work that I've done, I go in
Mhm.
a kind of withdrawn, sullen, uh,
Mhm.
painful state, you know, and I could mistake that for reality, that this is the world doing this to me, which is our default setting, or I could say, oh, there's some deep pain here that got triggered, and my reactions and the emotions that are swirling through me now are actually an old pain that's arising. A lot of people have difficulty hearing their own pain. A lot of the time when people are angry, the spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle said that wherever there's anger, there's pain underneath it. No, that's not true. Sometimes there is healthy anger in the present moment, not because there's pain, but because it's a necessary boundary setting. But he's right much of the time that when there's this kind of old pain that feels so familiar and that seizes you, that when there's anger, I mean, that feels that so familiar that it seizes you, there's some pain underneath. And it's that pain that we have to deal with. Otherwise, we just keep acting out our anger on the world. And so that, and I've talked to so many people in so many different countries, in so many different situations. When you ask them about their childhood, they tell me they had this happy childhood. And then I spend 3 minutes with them. And it turns out it's not that they didn't have happiness, but they also had a lot of pain, but they didn't hear their own pain. They learned to close their eyes, their feelings, their ears really to their own pain. So hearing the pain is really the hearing it is the first step in dealing with our trauma. And in this part, we discover some wrong ideas that we have about trauma. I'm not going to go into them now, but um, for all the fact that we talk about trauma all the time these days, at least some people do. Sometimes we don't do so very accurately, which can be very confusing. We can learn what trauma tells us about ourselves and our current experience. And I don't recommend trauma to anybody as a way of learning, but my God, it can be a powerful teacher if we pay attention to it in how it shows up in our present lives. So again, I don't wish it on anybody, but once it shows up, it can teach us so much about reality, about ourselves. And so that we're going to give you here a self-awareness protocol to get you to know what is the source of your trauma in your life. It's not
Yeah, exactly.
It's not as difficult as it seems. They're just ways of looking at it and noticing what happens, and that gives you a deep clue as to what actually happened to you. And then there's exercises to trace the impacts of trauma, which, as I said earlier, can show up in your behaviors, your reactions, your relationships, in your physical health to the point of severe illness or milder symptoms, and of course in mental health, and not least of all in addictions. Because addictions, as I've often said, they're not a primary disease. They're an attempt to solve the problem of emotional pain. So don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. And then we hope to teach you some exercises for behavior addictions.
Yeah.
That, given that addictions are always come along to meet some kind of a need, then can you meet those needs through other practices that don't cause harm like addictions do? So really, that's the essence of this here, the H part, the pain part, is to understanding your trauma, and that's what this section is about.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a few questionnaires on there, and so once I've learned through this process, hopefully to decipher the symptoms and what trauma has to tell me in my life. Something that we got so many questions on when we were building the masterclass is, how can I go from mentally understanding what happens to me within the trauma to actually changing it in my body and really healing on a deeper level. And that's the topic of the next part, which is empower yourself to heal.
Yeah. And so it's really true that the reason talking therapies by themselves can be helpful but limited in their potential is because trauma isn't just a question of ideas that we have. It isn't just beliefs that we have. They involve ideas and beliefs that we have, but they're also embodied. It actually happens in the body. It happens in the gut. It happens in our nervous system. It's embodied in our cardiovascular system, in our bodies, in our muscles, in our connective tissues. And So we have to be able to find ways of being with those traumatic manifestations when they show up. And most people, when they have these unpleasant impacts show up, they try to run away from them. And running away from them works temporarily, but it keeps them in place. And so the thing is to actually work them through the body. So there is steps, concrete steps that we teach in this masterclass to do that. You mentioned, Leo, this emergency kit. Well, this simply means um, when there's a fire, you need to be able to put it out, you know? And what happens when we get triggered is the part of our brain, which is the mid-frontal cortex here, right in front, right behind, the forehead here, is job, amongst other things, is what we call response flexibility. In other words, when something happens, we're not automatically driven into a reaction. As Rollo May, an American psychologist, says, is that between the stimulus and the reaction, the response, there's a gap, and in that gap is our freedom, where we can choose our response. What happens in a traumatic situation is we lose the capacity to choose. That gap disappears, and we go from stimulus to reaction like that. The idea of the emergency kit is to buy us some time, so that we don't just go into the reactive mode. Or if we do, we come out of it more quickly. Here's where I also teach about what I call the 4 A's of healing, which I talk about in my book, The Myth of Normal. And that means healthy anger, which I mentioned before, is a boundary defense. It means agency, regaining the capacity to be in charge of our lives and ourselves. It means authenticity, which I've already talked about. It also means acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean putting up with things or tolerating them. It means, first of all, accepting them the way they are and then dealing with it rationally. And there's a 5th A that I didn't include in my book, but I should have, which is awareness, because for all the other A's to work, and now we're talking about the part that no, we're still here in the empower part. Awareness. So for the other A's, the authenticity, the acceptance, the agency, the anger to work, we have to have awareness. And to gain that awareness, I teach something about my method called compassionate inquiry, which is a method I've developed to train therapists, and we've done that. It's a year-long, very intensive training program. That's not what we're teaching here. What we're teaching here is the importance of approaching yourselves with a question with the idea of curiosity. Not why did I do this, but I wonder why I did this. Do you notice the difference? Why did I do this? Or I wonder why I did this. Same question. One is not compassionate, one is the judgment. The other is compassionate. So we're teaching self-compassion here. And finally, reconnection. We talked about disconnection. My good friend Ruben George, who's an indigenous leader, a former chief here in Canada, had a wonderful conversation with me, which is in the masterclass on reconnecting with nature, such as indigenous people, as in Australia I just saw, or here in Canada and elsewhere, are still very much more aligned with than the rest of us are, and of course, reconnecting with ourselves as well. So that's the empower part, and then comes the align, the A, heal. Aligning means what? Aligning with relationships. Now, relationships, as I said earlier, we're creatures of attachment. We're creatures of relationship. That's our actual nature. We're not rugged, aggressive, greedy individuals by nature. That's ideological distortion of who we are. We're creatures of attachment, creatures of relationship. So relationships need to be protected. And that means our intimate relationship need to be protected. And I'll tell you, very often in my own life, and what has created problems is when I'm not looking at the relationship and protecting the relationship. I'm just looking at what do I want, you know. Like, you can be authentic and look at the relationship at the same time. In fact, that's the whole point. To protect the
Right.
relationship between couples, friends, between couples and friends, and of course, with
Parenting,
with
right? Because
yeah.
a lot of we got so many questions on how can I protect my children? How can I protect them from my trauma? But how can I protect them from trauma in general? And I think among other things here in the part 3, it's really what we try to address. Gabor, I see that the clock is ticking, and I really want to get to the Q&A. Maybe you can mention briefly about this part, and also maybe the part 4, and then we'll get to the Q&A.
Well, again, briefly in the aligned part, we're talking about relationships with others, and including and especially our children. And for that, you have to know what children's needs are, which we do teach. We know every parent wants to know how not to pass on our trauma to our kids. To some extent, we all do, but we can minimize that. And above all, what every parent wants to do is to raise a child that is emotionally resilient. And that doesn't mean the child never experiences disappointment or pain, but that when those things happen, and life will bring them along, I guarantee it, we know how to deal with them. So that's the parenting part. And then the L, it just means lifelong. Like I'm telling you, yesterday I was in a state. I had to deal with it this morning. And so this is that might seem discouraging to you, but I'm telling you, it's just a lifelong process. There are people who get totally enlightened and they get totally clear. I'm not one of them. And I don't know too many people who are. But the point is, we recognize that it's a lifelong process. It's easy to feel in certain moments that now you've got it, now you're balanced, now you're grounded. I felt that. And you think, no, I've really got it. It's never gonna go off the rails again. Well, believe me, it will. But the point is to have tools and the resilience to deal with it. And so it's lifelong. And the other meaning of L is that it's lifelong learning.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think, that was the goal of building this masterclass, is that we wanted to give you tools that you will still carry with you even after you're done watching. They will still be in your sort of toolbox to keep going further in that healing process. So we'll come to the Q&A in just a moment. So stand by. But I see a lot of people asking, how can I join this program? So you'll see a window appear on the side of the chat. You'll be able to click on it. You'll be asked to sign up and enter your email and a password, and then you can join the masterclass. Also, you can scan this QR code, and you'll be taken to the right page. So the public price for this masterclass will be $598. But especially for the launch of the masterclass, which is today, we will lower it at $299, which is 50%. And so for this, you will get access to the masterclass, but also to a digital workbook, which is about 60 pages of frameworks, of exercises that you can use. In bonus to this, you will get access to the whole Mentor Show library. So there's more than 100 programs on there, on self-confidence, on trauma, on also managing relationships. One of the masterclasses on there that is very popular is of Boris Cyrulnik, who pioneered actually the concept of resilience as a way to heal from trauma. He's a doctor whose parents were taken away by the Nazis when he was 4. And since then, he's built really this notion of resilience as a way to heal. And he has a very popular course on mentorship. And actually, every day we get testimonies of people who say that thanks to this course, they've overcome their trauma. They find ways to feel empowered again and to be able to face their past. So we're very proud of these kind of testimonies. As a founder of Mentor, you can imagine how rewarding it is to have this kind of reviews. And we hope that it will be the same for Gabor's masterclass. Actually, we're very confident that it will. And well, we're so confident that it can help you that we decided to give you a guarantee that we've never given before. So the guarantee goes as follows: that if you complete the program, you watch it and you do the exercises that are on there, and at the end you still think it's not for you, well, you can ask for your money back and you'll get it back. So hopefully, we hope you don't ask for your money back, because we want this to work for you. We worked quite hard for it to work for you. We want you to feel satisfied, but we don't want money to be the issue. And most of all, we want to give you all the reasons to take that step and invest in yourself and take that commitment with yourself to make real changes. And this is the opportunity to finally stop the past from dictating the present. And we want to give you all the reasons to take that step. So once again, if you complete the masterclass, the exercises, and you need your money back for whatever reason, you're unhappy with the content, or you just need the money, you can get it back. So here it is. Yeah, and one last thing before we get to the Q&A, is that for the first 100 clients, we'll give you a seat to a special seminar which will happen on 12th of March with Daniel Maté, which is Gabor's son, who has namely written the Myth of Normal with him. And he will do, on that day, he will do a group coaching to help you, these 100 clients, to help them make the most of the masterclass before they get started. So once again, if you want to join, you can scan this QR code, or you can type this address right here, and you'll be able to sign up.
I have another guarantee for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
I know that one of the master classes, one of the first ones you did, Leah, was with the great football player. By football, I mean the Europeans, and the great soccer player Karim Benzema.
Yeah.
Karim Benzema was a member of the French national team and also a leading member of the Real Madrid football team for many years. And Leo is guaranteeing that if you take the master class, you'll be as good a football player as Karim Benzema was. Is that the case?
Of course. Of course, and there are a few master classes of French chefs, so I can also guarantee that you will be able to cook as good as them.
Wonderful.
So let's get to the Q&A part.
Sure.
So we have a first question from Saba, who says, how can I change my anxious attachment and fear of abandonment?
Well, of course, I'd have to talk to you more in person to get really into it, but I just want to look at your language. You don't need to change anything, okay? Your anxious attachment and fear of abandonment, you've earned them. When I say you've earned them, it's not that you deserve them. Nobody deserves them. You should have had secure attachments in the first place. Then you wouldn't have this fear of abandonment. And if you had had secure attachments in the first place, then you'd have the confidence in yourself that even if somebody does leave you, you're still okay because you can handle it. Now, the child cannot handle it. So this anxiety and this fear of abandonment is actually a child part of you. You're never going to change that. That part of you is always going to be afraid of abandonment because it was programmed to have that fear, and that fear was perfectly rational. So the first thing to get about yourself is there's nothing wrong with you. However, what you want is for this adult part of you to show up to take care of that child part. So the question is not how do I change it. Don't try and change it. If a child was anxious, you wouldn't try and change the child's anxiety. What would you do with the child? You'd take care of the child. And then the anxiety would relax. So my quick suggestion is when those emotions come up, be with them. Don't try and make them go away. Don't make yourself wrong for it. Just feel it. And you might need to use something like the emergency kit I would recommend, which could be, say, music you could listen to, or beautiful pictures you could look at, or some meditations. But the point is, above all, allow your body, because when you have the anxiety and the fear of abandonment, it's not just up in your head, it's in your body. So feel the body and be with it. Being with it will give the message to that child part of you that you're not abandoning her or them. And that's what that part of you needs. So you need to accompany yourself, especially when that fear arises. Give yourself space and allow yourself. Now here's the good news. You've already survived it. You've survived those feelings when you were much more vulnerable, much more helpless, and much more exposed than you are right now. So allow yourself to feel it now. You'll survive it. And in allowing yourself to feel it, you're actually not abandoning yourself, which is what you really need.
Yeah, and I remember in the masterclass there's this daily practice, right, which is quite an essential part of the masterclass actually, because it's a routine that you can do daily, and that is made exactly to rebuild that connection with your body and to be able to listen to it. So we get a few questions on the masterclass that I will answer. So Ron, for example, will I get access to the masterclass and the workbook if I pay today? So yes, when you sign up and you buy the masterclass, you will get instant access to both. And also we have Aliyah who asks, how does the guarantee work? So the guarantee is the following: is that if you watch the masterclass and you do the several exercises that are on there, there are written exercises, but also some somatic exercises, meditation, and you in the end, you have a change of thought, you don't want it anymore, you don't think it was for you, you can just reach out to us, hello@mentorshow.com, and you will be asked to send us the exercises that you did, but then you will get your money back. And as I saw one of the comment actually of Jeff, this money back guaranteed, like this one is rare in my experience. I can confirm that it's very rare, and actually I've never seen it anywhere. So next question we have is from Val, and who asks how to deal with the trauma from a narcissist mother.
Yeah. Well, again, the first question is about you. So rather than focusing on the mother, because we tend to, this is a very common question these days, by the way. So thanks for asking it. Rather than focusing on the behavior of the mother, and rather than diagnosing the mother, I actually advise people not to diagnose anybody else. I mean, your mother may have behaved in narcissistic ways. I'm not making it wrong, but take the focus of diagnosing her and put it on what impacts in yourself are you trying to deal with. Because when you put the question in terms of how do I deal with the impact of a narcissistic mother, you're making it about her. But if you say, I fear abandonment, or I have a lot of emotional pain, or I have a lot of anger, uh, or I don't know how to be in relationships with people, then you're making it about yourself. So the first thing is, whoever asked this question, rather than focusing on the impact of the narcissistic mother, just talk about the issues in your life that are showing up right now. That's the trauma. The trauma, if you understood me right, if I expressed myself right, is not the fact that your mother was narcissistic. That's the traumatic event. The trauma, the wound, is what you're carrying right now. So, first of all, formulate the question about yourself. How do I deal with my self doubt? How do I deal with my self loathing? How do I deal with my shame? How do I deal with my resentment? How do I deal with my difficulty? So make the problem, not the problem, make the question about yourself. And then, a lot of my talks, my books, so particularly this masterclass, talks about how to deal with these wounds that are in ourselves. But the only thing I can say here, without knowing more about you personally, is make the question about yourself, not about your mother. And by the way, I'll tell you one more thing. I've certainly behaved in narcissistic ways towards my family. I really have. I never meant to. Nobody ever means to be that way. I'm not making excuses, and I wish I hadn't been that way, but I was. And there were reasons for it that had to do with my own trauma. I'm not asking you to forgive anybody or to excuse anything, or to forget anything. But the less you can hang out with resentment and about the other person, and the more you can just look at, well, what is it that needs healing in myself, the closer you'll be to empowering yourself.
Mm-hmm. I'll put the QR code again because I see some people are asking for it. I can also answer a few questions. We have Mona asking, how long does the masterclass last? So there's a little bit more than 6 hours of content. Some of it is are lessons, but some of it is also go-along exercise. So there are things that you can download on your phone, and whenever you need it, you can use those offline. So next question, I also see some people saying that they have trouble to connect. If you have an issue connecting, don't hesitate to send an image, a print screen to hello@mentorshow.com, and we'll fix it for you. So next question is Farah. So, Dr. Maté, I often struggle with feeling undeserving of good things, even when there's no logical reason for it. I suspect this stems from early conditioning, guilt, and a deep-seated shame. How can I begin to unlearn these patterns and develop a true sense of worthiness beyond intellectual understanding?
Okay. Well, it's a very common and a very important question.
Right.
First of all, let me give you an answer I've already gave before, but people do take some time to get the point. There's no such thing as feeling unworthy. That's not a feeling. A feeling is I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm sad, I'm angry. That I'm unworthy is a belief. So what you're asking is, how do I deal with this belief that I'm unworthy? Now, what do you feel when you believe that you're unworthy? You feel shame. But it's not a feeling that you're worthy, it's the belief that you're developed. That's the first point. The second point is, you don't totally believe it. How do I know that? Because you're here asking this question. If you totally believe that you're unworthy, you wouldn't want to be asking how to deal with this belief that I'm unworthy. You just take it for reality. The fact that you don't take it for reality means that you actually believe A, that you don't have to be that way, and B, that you can be helped, and C, that you deserve to be helped. Because if you didn't believe those things, you wouldn't be here.
Mhm.
Now, notice the part of you right now. Sarah, if you ask the question, notice the part of you that believes that it's worthy of help. That's the part that just asked this question. That part is there too. So pay attention to that part. Okay? Secondly, the guilt and the shame, I can tell you, it's got nothing to do with anything you ever did or didn't do. It had to do with the fact that as a child, you took on responsibility for the suffering of the people around you, and you didn't have the strength, the capacity, or the knowledge to save them. And this belief that there's something wrong with you was your way of coping with that terrible reality. And actually, even that belief that there's something wrong with you served the purpose of helping you. Now, how could that possibly help you? Here's how. Because if you believe that the problem is something wrong with me, then there's maybe something you can do about it. And that's much more acceptable for the child than to believe that the world is completely gonzo and wrong and terrible, and there's nothing I can do. So even the belief that there's something wrong with you came along as a way of making the word bearable for you. No, you don't need to keep carrying it. I can't possibly, just as answering a question that quickly, help you divest yourself of that belief. But believe me, it's only a belief. It's a belief that you acquired not because you ever deserved it, but because you had certain experiences to which you responded that way. And the good news is you're here not completely believing it, because if you completely believed it, you wouldn't be here. So pay attention to that stronger self-belief part of you as well, because believe me, it's there. That's my quick answer to that very deep question.
Yeah, it's not easy to answer to these questions quite so quickly. I'll also answer a few questions we got on the masterclass. So when does the masterclass start, and what does the lesson frequency look like? So when you buy, so that's Barbara asking, when you buy the masterclass, you will be able to have instant access to everything, right? So you will be able to watch it in one go if you want to watch the 6 hours, or you can watch one lesson every week. This is up to you. It's on demand. We also have a question: would you please briefly explain the heal method? So we went through the different parts of the masterclass just before. So I think the best way to have a summary of this is to go on the link that you have here, and the QR code. You will be able to see the different parts. But it goes as H, hear the pain, E, empower yourself to heal, where you get a lot of strategies and tools to heal. Then A, allowing your relationships, how to deal with trauma within couple and parenting. And then L, lifelong healing, to make this healing process last in the long run. And actually, I have a question for you here, Gabor, where I think it's very relevant to our emergency kit that we built.
Yeah.
It's a question from Ivana, and she's saying, if the automatic trauma response is so quick, how to deal with that?
Sometimes you won't. Sometimes it'll happen and it just takes you over. I mentioned that between the stimulus and the response, there's a gap. And in that gap, there's your freedom to choose how you want to respond. Well, in a traumatic reaction, that gap just closes. And I still find myself in that situation sometimes. Now, if you use the tools that we teach here, you'll develop more capacity to widen the gap. So I'm far less reactive than I used to be. I really am. At the same time, I can still sometimes lose that gap. And then I'm just reactive. Then there's a number of things you can do. One is, don't be hard on yourself. Your midfrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles that response flexibility, just went offline. You didn't do it deliberately. Don't be harsh on yourself. Don't allow yourself to sink into shame about it. You might have some regret. That's fine. You might need to apologize. That's fine. But don't sink into shame. You're just being a human being. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is just be with it. And this is where the emergency kit comes in. You know, be with it, allow it to be there, find some ways of getting some distance. And when you've got the distance from it, then you can go back and work on it. Well, what actually happened here? What happened was that some old brain circuit of mine got activated. And the more you look at where that came from, and the more space you give yourself, the more you'll develop that gap. But the long and short of it is, if that happens to you, you're a human being, that sometimes people talk about losing it. What is it that they lose? They lose that gap. They lose that response flexibility. They lose their adult self. It happens. And you can go back and deal with it, but use it as a learning experience rather than as an experience to beat yourself up about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I especially liked, I remember one of the tools in the emergency kit, which is a message to yourself, which is yourself recording a message to yourself in exactly that situation where you're going to get triggered. So you'll get a methodology to build that message, to write it, and then to record it. But you will also get the message of Gabor to himself. And I think that's very valuable to be able to sort of pick up whenever these triggers come by. I want to share, before the next question, I want to share the comment of Dana, who said, "I'm so incredibly thankful for this opportunity, Gabor. I appreciate you and your willingness to share your wisdom and experiences with us. I signed up for this masterclass and I am looking forward to diving in. So, well, thank you, Dana, for sharing this. It's very nice to have that kind of testimony, and I really hope you're gonna like it and you're gonna get something from it.
Well, and to tell you the truth, I share not only my wisdom, but I also share my lack of wisdom because, look, we're all human beings, you know, and this stuff happens to all of us. And remember, the last L, it's a lifelong, and it's learning. So as long as we recognize that it is lifelong, we don't get frustrated and down on ourselves, and we keep learning. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So next question is from Moonflower, and it's, well, how do you heal when you're still in an active extreme trauma daily?
Well, you know what? It's very hard to heal when you're in survival mode. So there's some situation in the world where you can't escape the ongoing trauma. I can think of certain war situations. You all know what I'm talking about. But if as an adult you're in a trauma situation, then the question is that all there is? Do you have to stay in that survival mode, or do you have any capacity or possibility of leaving that situation You can either leave it or change it, or you can 100% accept it, which is very, very difficult. Um, I'm not sure I know how to do that, but I can tell you something. I don't know if I showed this in the masterclass. Did I show that video from that prison in Texas, Leo, in the masterclass or not? You remember that or not? I have a video from a guy on death row in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been on death row for a couple of decades now for some crime he committed, a killing that committed when he was 18 years old. And in Texas, they execute people who commit things. It's a whole other story. But this guy, even on death row, he sent me a message. And what's remarkable about his video, this 2-minute message, is how calm, grounded, and present he is. So even in that situation, and he's facing death, and if he wins his appeal, the best he can hope for is life in prison without parole. And he's not even 40 years old yet, but he loves life. So you might say, here's a guy in a trauma situation who still find it able to heal. I don't know that I have the strength or the capacity to do what he's done. To answer your question, I'd say it's very difficult to heal in a trauma situation. So can you leave it? Can you change it? If you can't, it's radical acceptance. But I don't know how to do radical acceptance, so I can't teach that one to you.
Mm-hmm. Next question is Annie, how to heal from extreme nightmares?
Okay. Well, yeah, so there's extreme nightmares. Here's what Sigmund Freud said. Sigmund
Mm-hmm.
Freud, the father of modern psychology, psychiatry in a sense. And he had a lot of screwy ideas, but he also had a lot of very deep insights. And Freud said that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. In other words, dreams tell us what we're carrying unconsciously. So whatever shows up in your nightmares, it's the pictures or the content doesn't matter. It's the emotions that matter. So it must be extreme rage or terror, extreme pain. I imagine those are the emotions that are arising in the course of these nightmares. I'm telling you something, you experience those. Those nightmares are memories of what you experienced in childhood. Maybe before you had any words, maybe before you had any verbal recollection, maybe even in the womb, maybe when you're very small. But you're not crazy. Those emotions are carried in your unconscious. So you need to talk about those dreams with somebody who knows how to deal with the emotions that are arising in the course of your pain, in the course of your nightmares. And for those that have accessible and reliable and affordable access to psychedelic therapy, that can be a wonderful way of dealing with the unconscious, because you can experience those same emotions, but in an awake state when you're there as an adult to deal with them. So again, the nightmares are a message from your unconscious. They're memories of emotional states that you experienced as a child. There are ways of working with them. You're not crazy to have them.
I see, Fernanda, the link, if you have a screen that remains blank, you can also contact hello@mentorshow.com and send a print screen. If there's an issue, we'll fix it. We have actually a question for you, Gabor, on the masterclass. Can this masterclass help with fear? I feel afraid of everything. I'm 55 years old and have become so much less than I was due to fear.
Yeah. Well, I don't make blanket promises, but I believe it can help you. If it doesn't, you'd be a person that could take the class, do the exercises, and if you notice no significant improvement, Leo will be happy to refund your money. So all I can tell you, it's got a good chance of helping you. I don't want to make you a blanket promise, but it's got a good chance of helping you. And what do you got to lose? You know, if not, good therapy. And there are many good therapies to deal with that fear. Compassion inquiry, the one that I've taught. You can find those practitioners online internationally. Internal family systems, somatic experiencing. We talk about some of these resources actually in that PDF, in that workbook, I think. So if this method doesn't help you, there's other resources that we do recommend. I think it's got a good chance. I hope you give it a try. If it doesn't, well, then we'll certainly refund your money because you tried your best, and that's all we can ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So we have a question from Basant. How can I differentiate between my authentic self and the negative aspects that I need to change?
Yeah. Again, I wish I could work with you for 5 minutes online, but we don't have the resource or the setup to do that here. But here, what I would say very quickly. Part of you recognizes that there's an authentic self, otherwise you wouldn't ask the question. So pay attention to the part that notices, okay? That's your real self. Pay attention to that part. How does that part feel when you're noticing? So, and how do you feel when you're in the middle of those negative traumatic imprints? So your best guide is your body. When you're connected with your authentic self, there'll be a sense of expansion and ease. When it's the inauthentic, reactive parts, there'll be tension, roiling in your belly, tightness in your throat, tightness in your jaw. There'll be, in other words, your best guide is your body.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Jazzy. I have suffered depression for over 20 years.
Yeah.
I have period where I feel I have dealt with it. Then I get re-traumatized through narcissistic behavior. Can this truly heal?
Okay, so Jazzy, are you able to ask me a quick question? This narcissistic behavior, do you mean your narcissistic behavior or other people's? Can we get an answer to that or not?
I'm not sure we can.
Well, if we can't, here's what I would imagine you're asking about the narcissistic behavior of others. That's what I will imagine you mean here, not your own. So that you say, how can I deal with when I get re-traumatized by other people's narcissistic behavior? Here's my answer. If that's what you're asking, here's my answer. Those people with narcissistic behavior that you say re-traumatize you, by the way, they don't necessarily re-traumatize.
Jazzy answered actually other people.
Yeah, it is other people. Well, that makes sense. So they're not re-traumatizing you. They are re-triggering your old trauma. There's a difference. You're not that helpless kid anymore, even though you might feel like it, but you're not. So that's the first point. So you get triggered, and then you relapse. That's what happens. That's what happened to me yesterday. I had a relapse yesterday. If I was working with you, Jazzy, here's what I'd be asking you. I'd be asking you, before that triggering happens, before those people manifest their narcissism once again, do you have any gut feelings that are telling you that this isn't quite right? Well, let me tell you, I've asked this question multiple times in multiple different contexts with many different audiences, many different people I was interacting with. The answer is yes, there's a gut feeling that's warning you. And then I ask people, what do you do with those gut feelings? People say, I ignore them. So, if that's the case for you, which I suspect it is, then the real issue is not that other people are narcissistic, but that you don't pay attention to your gut feelings that warn you about them. So I would say it's not a question of how do I deal with a relapse when somebody behaves that way. I mean, that's a fair question in itself. But I think a more important part of the question is, what do you do with the gut feelings that are warning you before it happens? And I'm saying that's what you have to learn how to pay attention to. And then it won't matter so much what they do.
We have a question from Mariana. How is bullying in early childhood and adolescence related to trauma, and how can we take steps to heal? Which I guess must be quite a common question.
Yeah. So again, this question is framed in that this happens and how do I deal with the trauma. But what I didn't hear is, what are you trying to heal from? So what are the wounds? What are the impacts that you're carrying right now as a result of what happened then? Because again, the trauma is not what happened. That's the traumatic event. The trauma is, what are you carrying now? What is the wound that you're carrying? So first write down the wounds, okay? If it's shame, if it's self-loathing, if it's rage, if it's fear, whatever it is, that's the first point, okay? Now the second point is, and you've already done something to heal it. That's the good news. And I'll tell you what that is. When I ask people who were bullied in school, how long did it go on for? They'll say months or years. And then when I ask them, who did you talk to about it? Who did you tell? You know what the answer is? Nobody. Usually. Sometimes they'll say, I told my parents or teachers, but they didn't believe me, or they didn't do anything. But most of the time, the answer is, I didn't tell anybody. Now, this is an important point. I hope you can all get it. It's unnatural for a child not to tell the parents when they're suffering. As a baby, as soon as you suffered, you told your parents about it. I talked about that earlier. So you learn somewhere that you're all alone, that there's no help available for you. It wasn't your fault that you didn't go to your parents. It's because you got the message. They didn't necessarily mean to give you this message, but you got the message that they had no time for you. They didn't know how to deal with your emotions, that they were too stressed already. You better leave them alone. But basically you got the message that you're on your own. And that was the original traumatic event. And that sense of being alone and helpless, that's what attracts the bully. It's not that you deserved it or asked for it or wanted it in any way at all or deserved it. It's that the bully can tell. The bully picks on the vulnerable. That's how they make themselves bigger. And how do they know who's vulnerable? They can tell who doesn't have protection. So it's the kids that lack that protection because they lost the connection with the caring adults in their lives. They're the ones who get bullied. That's why a kid gets bullied in one school, they go to another school, they still get bullied. So what I'm saying here is that the original traumatic event was not the bullying, but by you being left alone. No, I said you've already began to deal with it. How do I know? Because you just reached out for help, which is what you couldn't do then. Okay, so look, you need to reach out for help. I'm not going to be able to heal you in this quick answer, but by raising the question, you've already done something that you didn't have the power to do or the capacity to do as a child. There's nothing wrong with you, but you learned a certain lesson that you're alone, and vulnerable and helpless, you're not alone and helpless anymore. Reach out for help. Whether that help means taking a masterclass or it means getting a good therapist, whether trained by me or somebody else, but get help because you deserve it and you're already asking for it. That'll deal with it, I promise you. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, you see Gabor answering your questions, obviously in a quick way, because we want to answer as many questions as we can. But you'll see in the masterclass that well, he has quite a mesmerizing way to really cut through the question by this interaction, and I think that was a very valuable part of the masterclass, that we invited about 15 people with different stories, and he has this interactive way of answering the questions, which I think can bring a lot of teachings. So we have a question from Mia, who asked, how do I heal from being traumatized and abused verbally and emotionally from my husband and son? I had to remove myself because I got so sick and they were not there for me.
Yeah.
Why do I feel like I should have stayed and helped them with their behavior?
Sure. So I hope you read my book. If you haven't already, it's called When the Body Says No. That's what happened in your case. You didn't say, I'm not blaming you. Remember, I said that this is a programming that you picked up in childhood. In childhood, remember when I talked about authenticity and attachment? What happened to you? What's the name of the person who asked the question, Leo?
Angelina, sorry.
Okay, Angelina, thank you. What happened to you, Angelina? Thanks for asking the question. Is that as a child, you had no choice but to choose unconsciously the attachment over the authenticity. And whenever you try to be authentic, you were made to feel guilty for it, like you're letting other people down. And you still have that belief. So you still have the belief that choosing yourself makes you a bad person. Remember, we had that exercise of, where you have trouble saying no. You had trouble saying no, your body said no for you. That's my contention. When you don't know how to say no, your body may say no for you in the form of illness. So your body was trying to save you. Strange to say, I don't recommend illness as a way of learning, but boy, it can be a powerful teacher if it shows up. And your body said no, because you didn't. And you didn't, not because it was your fault, but because you were programmed not to say no. And then, of course, you have this belief inculcated in you that if you say no, and if you say yes to yourself and no to others, you're a bad person. That's how you were programmed. So, both in this masterclass and in my books, When the Body Says No, The Myth of Normal, any number of my lectures, for example, you might want to watch one of my YouTube interviews with Mel Robbins, Robbins. Why do women get autoimmune disease much more than men do? It's because women are programmed not to say no. So what happened to you is what happens to a lot of people. That voice that says that you're guilty for saying no, that's just childhood programming. You can let go of it. You can learn to let go of it. And that exercise that I taught about, where you have trouble saying no, do that regularly. Just do it.
Yeah. We get some questions, for example, Margarita asking, are you going to provide a recording of this session? So this webinar, the recording will be in the masterclass. We will add it as a bonus. Next question, I think, is from Alicia. And she's asking, is there any relation between CPTSD and ADHD?
Well, it depends who you ask. Now, since you're asking me, I'll give you my answer. But but I'll tell you that my answer is different than that of most so-called experts. I think ADHD is a trauma response, in the sense that the tuning out. I mean, and if you're not familiar with my work on it, I'll be shameless to promote myself. The first book I ever wrote was called Scattered Minds. It's this book right here, Scattered Minds. I wrote that book 25 years ago. I was out after I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I saw right away that this is not some inherited disease. It's a response when there's stress in the environment, in a highly sensitive, genetically sensitive child. How does the child deal with the stress? By tuning out, by becoming absent-minded, by disassociating. That's a defense mechanism. But when does this happen? This happens when the brain is developing. So the absent-mindedness and the tuning out gets programmed into the brain. Now you got this so-called disease. No, you don't. But you got it as a coping mechanism. Now, research shows that the more trauma there's in a child's life, the more likely there's to be ADHD. Of course there is, because the more trauma there is, the more need for the tuning out. So there's a huge link between early stress. I'm not saying that everybody with ADHD was severely traumatized, but I'm saying everybody with ADHD is highly sensitive genetically, and they grew up in a very stressed environment. Very often there's trauma that we can call objectively called trauma as well. And lots of research shows that the more trauma there is, the much higher the rate of ADHD diagnosis. So the answer is emphatically yes.
I suggest we take one last question because we're over 2 hours now, and
Sure.
I don't want to take too much of your time. Thank you, everyone, by the way, for sharing so many questions, and we did our best to answer as many as we could. This last question is from Crystal.
Yeah.
Is healing from childhood trauma and anxiety always lifelong process, or can we expect a point of closure, at least from the trauma, if not the anxiety?
You can. Well, here's my answer to that. I don't like to answer that question in any sort of categorical, definitive, finalistic kind of way. Look, I just turned 81. Stuff still comes up for me. But boy, as I've often said, I say this at every age. I'm saying this now at 81. I'm 81 now, and I'm glad that I'm not as young and stupid as I was when I was 80. Okay, so that the learning is ongoing, and your capacity, it's actually possible to grow older. In other words, it's possible to grow as we age, at any age. Our brains can develop new circuits, new understandings, new ways of coping. So are you ever completely over it? That doesn't concern me so much. But can your life be much more empowered, much more present, much more grounded, much more worthwhile, much more meaningful, much more connected to yourself? Absolutely yes. And when stuff happens, stuff will happen, and then you'll learn again. That's my response. Now let me finish with something. There's an American neurobiologist and author, wonderful guy at Stanford University. His name is Robert Sapolsky. And Sapolsky wrote a book recently called Determined. And by determined, he means predetermined. And here's what he says. We're nothing more or less than the sum of that which you could not control. We're nothing more or less than the sum of that which we could not control. Our biology, environments, and their interactions. And therefore, he says, there's no such thing as free will. Well, is that true? Unfortunately, it's true a lot of the time. Because a lot of reactions are determined. That's what we've been talking about the whole day, the whole afternoon, I should say. but it doesn't need to be true. It is possible to achieve liberation gradually through awareness, through practice, through learning, um, through compassionate self-inquiry, um, through many teachings that other that great teachers have put out into the world. So yeah, we're very much determined much of the time, but freedom is all about letting go of that. And again, the key is connecting with ourselves. So I think Sapolsky's right much of the time, but I don't think he needs to be right all the time. And the whole point for me, both in my personal life and in my teaching, is to help myself and other people attain increasing degrees of freedom from that programming. And I'm rather proud of the work that Leo and his team and I have been able to do together. Leo, thanks very much. You guys reached out from across the ocean, and you even flew across the ocean. And you even flew across the ocean here to Vancouver a few months ago to film this program. It took a lot of work. I'm very pleased about it. People have freedom is possible, whether you take this master class or whether you don't. That freedom is available to you.
I mean, I am also personally quite moved to see this masterclass come to life. I think it's been a long road, and I agree. You know, we can be proud of the work that we've done, and actually, I think it's a good moment to thank the many people who worked on it. There's about 50 people who have worked on it for about a year and a half now. So thank you, everyone. We can be proud, and obviously, thank you, Gabor, because well, you trusted us coming from across the oceans, and you made this masterclass a reality, and also I think you really poured your heart in it, and just like in this webinar, with this this compassion and this commitment. So it was an honor for me to work with you, and I know the whole Mentor Show team shares that feeling. So I'm hoping this masterclass will change and will help many lives. And thank you everyone, obviously, for this great engagement in the chat, and for following us all along in this Sunday evening. Thank you everyone, and Gabor, have a good night.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody, and thank you.
Bye-bye. And now people will play the teaser, and we will also play one of the lessons of the masterclass for you. Gabor, you can just quit the online tab.
Okay, au revoir.
Au revoir. See you soon.